Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thanks for being here today. We're delighted to also participate in this great event. And as Camille was saying, we are going to have the second panel on medical imaging innovation, advances in detection, diagnosis, and treatment. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a context here, an introduction. Advances in medical imaging, and I have my cheat sheet, promise to bring even greater benefits for patients and ability to health professionals to accurately and quickly detect and diagnose life-threatening conditions. AI, digital patient twinning, and other developments hold significant promise. I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a cold. But ensuring equitable development and access is a critical consideration as we move into this new era. The field also faces challenges related to workforce development and training as these technologies become more mainstream. So in this panel, we are excited to be discussing these advancements in imaging, medical imaging, and also the role of AI, how AI plays a role in this particular area. And we have two distinguished panelists here today to help us understand what imaging is, innovation in imaging, the types of innovation in imaging that are happening at this time, and also the challenges related to that. So I'm very happy to introduce Peter Shen. He's the head of digital automation North America for Siemens healthcare. In his successful 25-year career in healthcare digitization, he has held several executive management positions in sales, marketing, and innovation, specifically focused on the introduction of new and emerging technologies to the healthcare market, including solutions in imaging IT, 3D advanced visualization, data analytics, digital ecosystems, and artificial intelligence. Peter is an industry leader in healthcare, imaging, IT, engaging with major health providers and leading technology partners, and routinely speaking at healthcare conferences and events, including being an advisor to the government. Recently, Peter testified before the U.S. House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health's hearing on understanding how AI is changing healthcare, and before the U.S. Senate Finance Committee's hearing on artificial intelligence and healthcare from promise and pitfalls. A graduate of Johns Hopkins University with degrees in biomedical engineering and mathematical sciences, Peter currently resides in Silicon Valley. Thank you. And then I also am very excited to introduce Professor Yuyin Zhou, who is an assistant professor of computer science and engineering at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Hey. And a former postdoctoral fellow at Stanford University. Yuyin earned her PhD in computer science from Johns Hopkins University. So, they are from the same university under the supervision of Bloomberg Distinguished Professor Alan Yulee. Dr. Zhou's research focuses on AI and machine learning for medical applications, in particular, image analysis and processing. Her prolific research output includes over 40 publications in prestigious machine learning and computer vision conferences and journals. So I will then turn the floor to them so that they can also introduce themselves a little bit more. And then we are going to start talking about some questions so that we can lead the discussion. And at the end, we'll have some time for questions from the audience. So that we have an interactive panel. So Yuyin and Peter, please feel free to introduce yourselves. I don't know who wants to start.
Okay, yes. So first of all, thank you, Katia, for the very wonderful and nice introduction of my past bio. And so a little bit more on myself. My current research interest mostly lies in medical image analysis. So a large portion of my group members are doing research about disseminating the latest AI technologies such as large language models, multimodal learning, and region transformers into different medical image analysis problems, such as medical image segmentation. I think one of the most representative work of my group, I don't know if you've heard of it, is called TransUNet. Now, this paper was published in 2021, and it already garnered over 2,000 citations and 2,000 stars and downloads in our public repository. And it was, according to Google Citations, one of the most cited AI papers in 2021. So a very significant achievement of my group. And along with that research direction, we're also expanding our research to different other problems, such as federative learning, because medical area is inherently very largely distributed. So we need to develop distributed machine learning algorithms to tackle with that. And we're also working on one-shot, few-shot adaptation of open foundation models to different medical imaging problems because we're short of data. And we're trying to also build some excellent simulators that can simulate human beings and align with human and clinical knowledge. Our group is still working a lot part of that. And also some other group members of mine are still working on computer vision and machine learning problems, building very fundamental machine learning algorithms to be robust to different label noise, to distributed data, to incomplete and also weakly labeled data, et cetera, et cetera. I'm very much on the machine learning and the computer vision side, but I'm also very enthusiastic about application in medical image analysis as well. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Yuyin. So please, Peter, please introduce yourself.
Yes. Yeah, no, thank you, Katia, and good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Shen. I'm the head of our digital and automation organization here at the Siemens Healthineers. So very honored to be here and part of the symposium. Honored also to sit next to someone like Dr. Zhou as well and all her accomplishments. So Siemens Healthineers, we're the healthcare arm of Siemens. I think one of the sponsors, as you saw earlier today for the symposium here. We're an organization of over 71,000 individuals globally who are really focused on engineering and creating the next breakthroughs and innovations in healthcare that can be delivered to patients, quite frankly. So we focus in areas around diagnostics, imaging, of course, and therapy as well. So we work with actually close to 90% of all the healthcare providers that are here in the U.S. and across the globe, tackling everything from population health to chronic diseases to cancer care as well. Actually, we, as a med tech company, we have the distinction of being the only med tech company that offers end-to-end cancer care. So everything from screening and diagnosis all the way down to actually treatment and survivorship as well. So the patient is really at the center of everything that we do, and it's something that's very important for us. What in particular, where we see great opportunity is, again, this intersection of healthcare and technology, and in particular, the promise that artificial intelligence plays going forward here to enhance both the diagnostic and therapeutic solutions that take care of patients. So we're very excited. We've been working in this space in particular for close to 2 decades, over 2 decades of work in artificial intelligence. We'll talk about some of the impact that we see in particular in the medical imaging side, and working very closely with clinical collaborators and great scientists like Dr. Zhou here going forward as well. So really looking forward to the opportunity to chat more with some interesting questions I think that we have, Katia, on this topic.
Sure. And actually, I think this is a very exciting panel because we will have the point of view both from the industry perspective and also from the research academic perspective. So let's start with our first question. Like with almost every industry these days, AI promises to revolutionize medical imaging, particularly in the area of image analysis. What applications of AI do you feel hold the most potential? What medical conditions will benefit from these developments? So I'm gonna, you have to compete for.
Okay, so I guess I kind of want to start. So first of all, I was, if you are familiar with I don't know if you're familiar with my research works, but most of my research works in medical image analysis belongs to medical image segmentation, because first of all, we do have the most public available data in this area, like compared to all of the other problems like early cancer detection, like you said, chronic disease detection, etc. We do not have that much data in those areas that's close to treatment planning and diagnosis. But in contrast, we have tons of data in medical image segmentation. Now, a few standing public repositories that I can think of are like data sets like AIM-MOS, like BTCV, that's published by Vanderbilt University in 2015, and then also the medical segmentation decathlon. And also recently, there are a few challenges in MICAI, that's the FLAIR challenges. Also, all of these data sets are for multi-organ segmentation in the abdominal area. So just for this abdominal region, there are already tons of public data available for training a segmentation network. So that is why if you go to MICAI, if you go to CVPR, you will find most of these papers belong to medical image segmentation. And like I said, one of my most representative work is the TransUNet. That was the first work that combines the region transformers and UNet to build a very successful segmentation network, combining both the precise localization ability from UNet as well as the long-range modeling capability from the region transformers. And starting from that to now, there are tons of works coming out. And now even there's new architectures that disseminated the latest Mamba architecture from large language models. They use that for medical image segmentation as well. So I think for this area is really thriving. But from the clinical side, medical image segmentation is not like the ending point, right? It's not a real clinical problem. It's a prerequisite. It can help facilitate the clinicians and doctors, in my opinion, but it's not the essential clinical endpoint, right? If you really want to, perform early, cancer diagnosis, for instance, in one of my previous research projects that was in Johns Hopkins University, collaborating with some of the greatest doctors in the Johns Hopkins Medical Institute. The doctors there were really keen on detecting early pancreatic cancer, because early pancreatic cancer is very difficult to detect because the textures are very subtle, but the survival rate, the 5-year survival rate is really, really low. So that's why they were really keen on this application. And so this project was going on for 5 years. And at the beginning, we were trying to build segmentation networks starting from just the pancreatic region. And then we start to build the segmentation model for all the abdominal area to segment every part of the abdominal region, like including not just pancreas, but also like liver, spleen, different vessels, duodenum, columns, etc. And those were all very successful because we have a lot of data. And then when it comes to the real early pancreatic cancer detection problem, which is, I guess, much more diverse and much more challenging, and also the data has been far more scarce. And then for that category, our performance significantly dropped. For instance, if we now if you want to find like a liver segmenter or a spleen segmenter, you can try any public models out there, and usually you get like 90% of dyes, for example. But for pancreatic cancer detection, the highest performance that we can get is only like around 60%. So there's a large room for improvement. But I think the essential challenge in that problem lies in the inherent variability of that disease, and also the extremely subtle textures. So, and also it's extremely small. So that's why it was very, very difficult. But I think with more emergent data, and also with the more advanced techniques, I think we can still improve the performance. For example, when I was doing a PhD there, we began to improve the performance actually. So, but essentially, I think the bottleneck is still the data. So I think we can definitely make a more significant stride if we have more data.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Dr. Zhou. I think it's what's interesting. When we talk about artificial intelligence in healthcare, it's a natural fit that medical imaging kind of becomes a leading area in the healthcare space, because if you think about it again in our personal lives, how this AI and this emerging technology is already kind of ingrained in a lot of the things that we do, like with the photos that we take and its ability to recognize people and smiles and all that stuff like that. Those same principles are really applied also here in medical imaging, and this is why you see a lot of great work in the AI space already happening within medical imaging. And as I mentioned earlier, from a Siemens perspective, we've been focused in this area for over 2 decades, and many patients actually don't realize already that artificial intelligence is having an impact on them. So when a patient goes in for that medical imaging exam, for example, they go get that MRI of their knee, or they go get maybe, let's say, a screening chest CT examination. Today now, the modern day scanners that are doing those exams, they have cameras built into them. And those cameras are actually looking at the anatomical structures of the patient, so that when that patient comes in to get that MRI of the knee, it's automatically positioning that patient in that MRI scanner so that the images that are taken from that MRI are of the most pristine or highest quality. So it's really automatically kind of doing some of these workflow improvements within medical imaging. And then as Yuyin was alluding to here, we're already seeing the impact of AI and medical imaging in terms of different aspects of the diagnosis process. So being able to screen and look for abnormalities that a patient might have, let's say in that chest CT scan or that chest X-ray scan that they've had, being able to segment out those different abnormalities, being able to characterize them, being able to measure or quantify them as well, and then now generating all this data that they can feed to in this case, the radiologist, so that he or she can actually use that information to make a more informed diagnostic decision. And then we also see that even on the therapy part as well. So patients who, let's say, unfortunately might have some sort of cancer or cancerous tumor, you've got now segmentation tools that are built around artificial intelligence that make sure that we're tracing out exactly where that tumor is, that cancerous tumor is, because let's say we want to subject that to radiation therapy to try to kill those cancerous cells. We need a tool that has to segment out what that kind of cancerous tumor looks like. If you think about it, without artificial intelligence, that becomes a real manual process. Like if in layman's terms, if you had to take on a piece of paper and you had to like trace out a strange kind of shape or whatnot, it would be a little bit of a tedious task. Now think about trying to do that over an entire volume of that kind of strange shape. So now it's not just one piece of paper, but now it's thousands of pieces of paper. And you've got to sit there, and each piece of paper might have a little different nuance in terms of how I trace out that particular strange shape. This, for cancer treatment, radiation therapy, this takes, unfortunately, clinicians, physicists, it takes them hours, sometimes days, to kind of do this manual effort. Now you introduce a technology like artificial intelligence, some of the great work that Dr. Zhou is doing and others in terms of segmentation, And you reduce this kind of laborious effort down to a mere matter of minutes, sometimes even seconds. And what does that translate to? That translates for the patient, their ability to maybe get their therapy, their treatment faster. They don't have to wait till next week to go get that radiation therapy. They can actually get it later this afternoon because of that artificial intelligence. So AI is really having a profound impact already within medical imaging, and I think it's a real growing area for AI within healthcare.
Yeah. So again, I of course, we see all these advancements using AI, but as both of you pointed out, data is the frontier, right? And we have that experience firsthand, right, Yuyin, with our own project. So how can we circumvent that, or how can we try to mitigate that so that we can advance research, in particular in these areas where we don't have the data, right? Where it's so difficult to get the data. And of course, with privacy and security concerns built into the problem, right? How can we solve that?
Yeah, I think I want to answer this question from two perspectives. First of all, I would really like to see some initiatives in academia or in industry that can really get all of the available data together, assemble all of the available data and publish that. Because for medical AI researchers like myself, the data shortage is really the most severe bottleneck that we're having right now. That is why we're working on a lot of one-shot, few-shot algorithms, because we really do not have enough data. So if we can have some initiatives to bring together people from different disciplines, from clinicians, from computer science, from engineering department, and all of these people together working on a real massive data that combines all of different kind of rare disease and other challenging problems and really solve it together. I think that can probably really help make big progress and even some breakthrough findings. And another perspective that I want to bring on is, like I just mentioned, you can still work on the algorithm side, right? You can still work on a one-shot, few-shot adaptation problems using self-supervised learning strategy, unsupervised learning, and the transfer learning, etc. You can still use some of the existing algorithms to face this data shortage, to unleash the most potential of the existing data with whatever you have. So I think both sides need to be pushed. So this is also what my lab is currently trying to do. On one hand, we're trying to assemble more data from collaborators from UCSF and UC Davis and et cetera. On the other hand, we are trying to improve the algorithm as well.
Yeah, I think I would echo some of the concerns that Dr. Zhou has brought up here. From my perspective, this topic of data is kind of twofold. One is certainly the quantity issue, because it clearly has been acknowledged here that the success in the future of artificial intelligence is going to be dependent on information and data here, and certainly from a innovator's perspective in the industry side, we value the clinical partnerships that we have with a lot of different providers, with academia as well, to try to help them get access to this data, because we know that having that data is an important aspect to train these algorithms. I think the other aspect of this data, and it was rightfully pointed out in the previous panel as well, is the quality of the data. So it's one thing to say, okay, yes, give us a bunch of data on pancreatic cancer patients, and you can't just take that data and assume at face value that this is accurate data, that this is precise data. This is data that we should use to train our algorithms here. So it's something that if you think about it, it's not a trivial task to actually go through, and I think this was admitted in the previous panel, to go through and actually re-qualify the data that you've obtained to actually make sure that is this truly a pancreatic cancer patient? Is it truly meeting the specifications that I need to train my algorithm? That's not a trivial task, because in many cases you have to have clinical experts involved. Maybe you might have to have technical experts involved as well. I mean, this is something that it takes a lot of effort. And to me, this is where I think industry, academia, clinical partners, we all have to come together, because certainly we acknowledge that, some folks might not have all the resources. We in industry don't have the expertise of folks like Dr. Zhou or some of the clinical expertise that are out there. We all have to work together here, but we might be able to provide some of those resources that help you kind of get more data, but also making sure that data is of the highest quality. And so at Siemens, we've been actually trying to push our industry to really to start to adopt some best practices as it relates to developing these AI algorithms. So it's not one thing of saying like, oh, I have billions of pieces of data and now we can create, all these different algorithms, but really the quality of that data. How was this data obtained? One of the big things that we push also is, because we're so concerned about kind of the end story, which is again about the patient, like are we ensuring that the data that we're using to train these algorithms is reflective of the patient population that it's actually going to serve? So if I'm creating, let's say, an algorithm that identifies lung nodules, for example, in medical images, and I train that algorithm with a bunch of patients that are of let's say, Western European and North American descent, it's gonna be great when I deploy that algorithm, let's say in London or something like that. But if I take that same algorithm now and deploy it in China, for example, or in an Asian country, it's gonna fail miserably. And so we can't, so just because you have data, right, and say that, oh, I have this data, now I'm gonna create this algorithm and it's gonna work wonders, you have to be mindful of again, that patient population that you're gonna be applying this algorithm towards. And that's a real important aspect from our perspective. And I think that then brings that, I think it was brought in the first panel here. It's thinking about these type of topics at its inception versus at its application, right? So it's one thing to say, oh, I've got this algorithm, now should I use it on this patient population or not? Let's talk about how about building these algorithms based on how what's the intended use and the intended population for that algorithm in the end. So really bringing these type of topics to the forefront. And that's something that we, from an industry perspective, we're trying to encourage our industry colleagues to say, hey, before we go out there and try to market and make a whole bunch of different algorithms, let's take a step back and really understand, what is the intention? What is the patient population? What are we really trying to do here before we actually start to push these algorithms out in healthcare?
Yeah, great. So I think those, comments, they actually bring up two issues, like the diversity of the data, as we have been talking about, right, over and over again, is really critical, right? So that you can have these algorithms that can apply to diverse populations, right? And also, I think another interesting issue, which was also brought up in the previous panel, is that AI can also come to the rescue here and use generative AI models to create data sets based on existing data sets, so that you can have more data and more diverse data. Of course, controlling some knobs of how these data sets are generated, and of course have enough data, real data, that you can validate these models and these data sets that are being synthetically generated. So I think that is also a very interesting area of research that AI can also play a role. Okay, great. So let's go to the next question here. Another exciting area of development is digital patient twinning, which Siemens has been a leader in developing. What is the promise of this technology, And when will this be available to most patients?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting area, Katia. I mean, we've talked about some of these the great promises and some of the great realities that's already happening with artificial intelligence and medical imaging. What we're realizing here at Siemens is, like, again, medical images is only one aspect of that patient's journey through healthcare here. And we've got this, so there's other data that's being generated about that patient as he or she goes through their healthcare experience. There's laboratory data, there might be pathology data, there's obviously their own even genomic data or whatnot as well. And what we're actually seeing the biggest promise for a technology like artificial intelligence is certainly today it's great, being able to identify, segment, find abnormalities within and doing an individual task. That's wonderful. But where we see the biggest potential is now artificial intelligence being able to consume all these other pieces of clinical data related to the patient. So have AI take a look at not just the medical images, but also the lab results, the pathology results, the genomic information about the patient, and find correlations within all that data to maybe help the clinician make that more informed diagnostic decision or more personalized therapeutic decision, because now you've consumed all this additional information. So that effort is what we call kind of digital twinning or patient twinning here. So it's really kind of saying, if I have medical images of that patient's heart, for example, can I combine that with other pieces of clinical data? So can I look at the patient's physiology? Can I look at the biomechanics of the heart? Can I see how the blood is flowing, kind of the pulmonary aspects of the heart, and combine all that information together to be able to create essentially a digital twin or a replica, a virtual replica of that patient's heart. So why is that important? What's the promise of doing that? So if I do that, it's just becomes now like a science experiment, right? So now if a patient has an arrhythmia or a tachycardia or some sort of abnormality of how their heart operates, can I now use the digital twin and start to test different therapies on that kind of digital twin to see which therapy is the best or which one's the most optimal? And so I can actually do all this testing kind of in this with this digital twin or this digital patient twin, and figure out what is that optimal therapy for that patient. And then once I figure that out, then I can actually go and interact with the patient and give that patient that particular therapy with the hopes that with probably the stronger likelihood that I'm going to have a higher level of success in terms of treating that particular patient. And that's what's really exciting about digital twinning or patient twinning. And so that's where we're investing a lot of time and effort, as well as really combining the expertise that and the science here, and looking at all these different pieces of clinical data, not just for therapies, trying to figure out what's the best therapy, but if you think about it, you could actually then rewind the entire patient journey and start to look at preventative care. So, if I have, again, this digital twin or patient twin here, what can I do what can I test to figure out that I should do so that patient actually doesn't need to go to the hospital, right? Or doesn't have that arrhythmia or doesn't have that tachycardia with their heart? Is there something that we can change in that, maybe that patient's lifestyle or the way that they're or some other treatment or whatnot, and maybe address these challenges before they even happen for that particular patient? So a lot of promise with digital twinning, patient twinning, exciting stuff that is future down the road. But again, it's all driven by this technology that's artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. I actually for the first time hear the idea of digital twinning, and I think it's really, really interesting. And it kind of reminds me of the latest advancement that was released by OpenAI, the Sora model, that they refer to it as the word simulator, because they are able to create this about 1 minute long videos that look like just what's happening in the real world. And it's very high resolution, and it's even obeys the physics rule, even though the model does not inherently learn that. And also UC Berkeley, I think just not long before today, they also released the award model that's doing very similar things. I think people down there, if you are working in engineering and computer science, you probably have been aware of this recent progress. And I think these technologies might be useful for this digital twinning idea because they are very powerful tools to simulate the world. I mean, in this case, it should be simulating a person, a patient, its conditions, images, and also other, like longitudinal monitoring, et cetera, to comprehensively evaluate this person's, health conditions and also other data as well from the same patient. So I think this is a really interesting idea. And if that does work, like we can actually successfully create a synthetic human being that is paired with a real patient. And like Peter said, like we can really develop a lot of cool algorithms related to like preventative care and also diagnosis, treatment planning, all so many other different things, surgical planning, et cetera. So that can be like creating a little lab rat for a human to really help advance a lot of things. I think that's really cool. Yeah.
So again, it's of course a very exciting technology, but what are the challenges and how can we make this real, right? And given our discussion of the data, challenge, right? Again, I think that is also another problem here, right? So I don't know, Peter, where you envision this going and when you think that this would be like a mature technology that can be actually used.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, we're taking steps today, but I think there's still a little bit of work that needs to be done. And as I mentioned earlier, it is not only just having the data, but making sure that the data is high quality, and reflective of that patient population. Even if you're going to generate synthetic data is based on real data as well, right? So that real data has to also be of high quality and high accuracy or whatnot. So, these things are important that have to be addressed again at its point of inception. And this is where I personally believe there has to be collaboration across the board. Yeah. So, industry that has some of the, has maybe some of the resources that are available in terms of computing power and personnel and everything, but then having, brilliant scientists like Yuyin and others being able to work with us and guiding us, and then clinicians as well being able to say, hey, this is where you should be focusing your time and effort. Yeah, this is where our patient population is really struggling right now. These are things that we need to know because we can create a bunch of different algorithms, no question, but really let's create algorithms and AI tools that are going to be beneficial for that patient in healthcare in the end.
Yeah, I agree. I think the most significant challenge that I can see lies in the real world deployment, because when you build an algorithm, it's one thing to build an algorithm, but actually I think a lot of past experience have shown that a lot of the great models that have been advertised on some of the most impactful research papers, they do not really well apply to the real world clinical rooms because of, like Dr. Shen said, like due to the population difference, a lot of fairness issues and other robustness issues can occur because the training data was just not representative enough of the real, clinical environments. So I think that can be the one of the most significant challenges. Unless we can really have that high quality and really representative enough data to do this training, otherwise we're probably not going to be able to get there soon enough.
Dr. Zhou, I love the fact that you bring up the topic about adoption, because I think this is really what's inhibiting artificial intelligence within healthcare today is how do you take these wonderful tools that we've just talked about, has some significant benefit for the patient, but how do you actually integrate that into the routine clinical workflow that doctors and providers are doing to take care of patients today. And I think there's a lot of challenges there. I think, the first is there's a errant assumption that I think that I know we in industry have, and I'm sure also I think you guys see it also in academia, is that we come up with an AI algorithm that let's say is profoundly accurate and is really great, and so we want to now roll it out into the clinical setting, and we try to tell these doctors, hey, this thing is wonderful, it's going to be the best thing, and it doesn't get adopted. And the reason why is I think we tend to forget that especially these clinicians, they've spent their entire career, learning and perfecting their ability to diagnose disease or their ability to treat a patient. So if you think about it, they are an algorithm themselves. Yeah, they've actually, in their mind, when they are presented a chest CT looking for lung nodules, they have a process already that they go through. When they look at that chest CT exam, to really identify where are those abnormalities and quantify them and qualify them and all whatnot. So they've spent their entire life, doing all of that. So now here we come in and we say, hey, we've got this wonderful technology, artificial intelligence. It's gonna find all these things faster, better, more accurate, all that type of stuff.
It's going to replace
It's gonna, it might, type of thing. And we tell them you got to use it. And so think about it now from their perspective. If they have this pattern, this methodology that they've established for decades in terms of how to do this thing. And now we come in and we say, hey, we've got this other tool that's generating a bunch of data also that you should take a look at as well. So from their perspective, it's actually more information that they've now got to process. So they've actually now got to sit there as like, hey, is this what this algorithm said? Does this make sense? Is this relevant? Is this not relevant? So a lot of the claims of like, oh, AI is going to save a bunch of time, it's going to make it easier for the clinician. Some of it initially here is a little bit, maybe not so much, because again, that clinician has to now take this data and also interpret it and consider it. So in some of the early studies that we had with some clinicians, the introduction of AI actually increased the time that they had to spend looking at particular images. Now, of course, over the course of time, once they got more confidence in these AI solutions, that time went down. But it's something that we need to be mindful of, that this adoption is not something like, oh, we created something wonderful here, now just go use it and everybody's going to be happy. There's going to be a little bit of effort. The second point I'll make on adoption is that it's I think very relevant for this symposium, is that it's not always ubiquitous either. Like, so you have, we have these wonderful algorithms that are being generated, whether it's industry, academia, or whatnot. How do you get that into the hands of the physician that is taking care of that rural patient population or underserved patient population? Yeah, there's a big challenge right now, and this is a big effort that we're doing in Washington. Katia mentioned some of the discussions that I've had with some of our folks in Congress, is we're trying to say, okay, we see that AI has these great benefits. We've talked about it again here, even this morning or whatnot. We want to get this into the hands of doctors so that they can help these patients. But how do you do that? So again, for maybe larger organizations, who have kind of the financial flexibility, they can actually make that investment into AI and say, yeah, we're gonna take these AI algorithms, we're gonna deploy them for our doctors, and they can use them, and we'll have happy patients and whatnot. Not all providers have that financial flexibility to do that, quite frankly. Yeah, and especially folks in rural or underserved populations, they don't have the ability to say, okay, yeah, let's spend a bunch of money on artificial intelligence. And unfortunately, with the way that our healthcare system works in this country today, a lot of that healthcare investment, it depends on some sort of reimbursement that happens from the payer side. And so, and unfortunately, with a new technology and emerging technology like artificial intelligence, there hasn't been an established and consistent way to reimburse or pay for these technologies yet. So again, in a larger organization or healthcare system that has maybe some of that financial flexibility, they're willing to take that risk and say, hey, we'll invest in this technology and this is going to help our patients. Again, healthcare systems in rural, underserved areas where they don't have that financial flexibility, and they don't know whether they're going to get any sort of reimbursement for it. They're kind of shying away from saying, well, why should I invest in this if I'm not sure if I'm going to get any sort of reimbursement or any knowledge that I'm utilizing this particular tool for our patients. So that adoption, unfortunately in our healthcare system, driven a little bit by the dollars here and everything, but this is another aspect that's holding back this technology from being used ubiquitously and benefiting all the patients that are out there.
Great. So in fact, I'm gonna take advantage of this discussion to put in a plug for CITRIS, right? Because looking at the discussion that we were having about convincing clinicians to adopt this kind of technology, right? Having them design and plan this technology with us, right, is completely, is definitely something super important, right? Because, they will tell us, like we're these crazy engineers that are trying to do, this pie in the sky thing. And then the doctors are going to tell us, and the nurses, right, are going to tell us, are going to bring us to reality and say exactly what they need from us, right? And then, this sort of, feedback loop between the clinicians and the engineers and the scientists is key to actually make technology feasible in the real world, right? And I think CITRIS is, exactly about that. Is kind of bringing all this, these areas together and doing this great interdisciplinary work. And we are witnessing that as, part of CITRIS. And I think that the outreach also, right, to these underserved communities and looking at diversity and inclusion, which is another very important aspect of what we are trying to do, is also something that is crucial for these technologies to be adopted and also available, throughout the society. So yeah.
I mean, I think it goes back to what we talked about before, which is again so nicely brought up in the previous panel, but I think we reiterated here is that these topics have to be thought about not just in application, but actually at inception. We need to have, not just diverse data, but we need to have diverse individuals working on these technologies to help us be mindful of these type of topics. At the point of inception. So not after we've created it and now we say, oh yeah, hey, don't forget about the underserved or the underrepresented population. No, we need to be thinking about that as we're designing, and I think you would agree, Dr. Zhou, I mean, at when you're designing these type of algorithms.
Yeah, that's what I totally agree. So I think, if everyone can work together, I mean, from both the, like you said, the industrial side, who have the tons of GPUs, and in academia side, and also in the, clinician side, if we can bring the expertise from all areas together. And like you said, we have to think about regulations at the same time as we design the models. So that's the only way we can really save effort and build a really successful model. But in my opinion, is that I'm still pretty optimistic about this, because I have been able to see, everybody has been able to see like the great significant achievement like ChatGPT in the past years really revolutionized the whole area. So I'm still very optimistic. I think we really need the right people, that's for sure. We need the right data. And then if everyone can work on it together, I think we can build something wonderful as well. Yeah, I'm still pretty optimistic.
Great.
Yeah.
And I think we are, we have like 10 minutes left. So I think we have had some wonderful discussion. 5? Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, time goes fast when you're having fun. So I just wanted to, open the floor for some questions, because I think that getting some questions from the audience would be also great to sort of have an interactive panel. So there are a few questions. Do we have time for? Oh, okay.
Thank you. It's a very, very wonderful talk. I have sort of an observation and two observations, really. One is that I'm a pathologist, and I understand there are over 100 FDA-approved radiology or imaging AI tools, and in pathology there are 4. So I just wonder why that is. And my second point is the danger of relying too much on market research and talking to potential users up front. And there's the old story of when Henry Ford asked farmers what they needed for better plows, and they said stronger horses. So you don't want to be tied to people's lack of imagination.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are both fair points. I mean, I think what you're seeing with, a bunch of different applications in radiology, but few in pathology, shows again how new this whole technology is in the healthcare space. I think radiology kind of picked up on it initially, but I think pathology is now starting to realize, well, wait a second, we generate images too. There's an opportunity to leverage this technology as well. So I think there's going to be some rapid adoption that's going to come from the other disciplines as well. And certainly I think we also have that same concern as well as, and I think this goes back to the theme of working together. So we do want to have the clinicians' input to understand where the needs are, but we do also need to work with academia who are creating these wonderful and new and exciting different models and different spaces that, again, we on the industry side might not be thinking about, the clinicians might not be thinking about because they're thinking about the patient. So we need to have kind of this three-legged stool where we need to have this relationship with academia as well for this technology to be successful.
Hi, thanks for the great panel. Something we keep hearing over and over in AI are privacy concerns, who owns the data, and things like that. But as Peter pointed out, Siemens and many companies, we've been using AI for a long time. AI just got very hot with ChatGPT. So my question is, can we learn from that? So all those AI you use to position someone in the scanner, for example, how did you obtain that? What's the privacy concern of all those images you got? Yeah. Who owns that data? You, or the hospital, the patient? Maybe those answers are already answered that we've been searching for.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great question, and I think it's at least from a Siemens perspective, we've instilled some very, very significant best practices around data usage. So the most important thing that I would underscore is we value patient confidentiality and respect the relationship that the patient has with the physician. So we understand that confidentiality is there. Now, where we work closely, and this goes back to this whole topic of collaborating, we work very closely with our clinical partners to be able to work with them to innovate, but then also if there's a willingness by those clinical partners to share data, we utilize that data for the creation of some of these algorithms. Now, what do we do with that data? So let's say, UCSF says, oh yes, Siemens, come, we want to partner with you, we're willing to share data. So we don't back the truck up and just start taking all the data. We actually quarantine the data. So at Siemens here, what we do is if any new clinical partner that we work with, we actually, and they're willing to share data for kind of mutual kind of development here, we quarantine the data. So even though they might, UCSF or whoever might say, hey, the data is completely de-identified, removal of all PHI, PII, you can't figure out who it is or whatnot. We still quarantine the data. And the reason why we quarantine it is because we want to go through that extra effort to really make sure we can't tell or identify who this patient is, where this data came from, or anything of that sort. So we go through that extra step there. And then as a best practice in our organization, not anybody can get access to that data. I can't, even though I help run our organization, I can't just be like, oh, I want to go now, download a bunch of patient data. You're not allowed to do that. We actually have an AI office of big data, if you will, at Siemens, where their sole purpose is to police and control all the data that we're utilizing or working with our different clinical collaborators. So they actually you have to provide justification as to why do you need access to that data? What is the algorithm that you might be working on or developing or whatnot? And so there's a lot of controls that are in place, both cyber controls, physical controls as well. And so we've been doing this for a long time, so we kind of know what those tenets are. What we're trying to encourage now is the rest of the industry needs to be upheld to those same standards, right? So whether you're a big organization like Siemens, or maybe you're a young startup that's out there doing artificial intelligence, you still have to have these type of standards in place. Yeah, you should still be quarantining the data and not taking it at face value. You should still be controlling who has access to the data. These are important aspects in order to make sure that the patient privacy is protected.
Any other questions out there? Oh, I think we have do we have time?
I think we're about. There was one in the back, though. Maybe we'll take just one more and then.
Oh, okay.
Hi there. So I'm Sharon Goldfarb. I'm a family nurse practitioner of 30 years and a longtime academic. When the technology, I'm not a Luddite, but I just want to say when the technology is promised in one way, like electronic medical records, it actually cut down on productivity by 42%. And now we see 75% of the nursing workforce is leaving because they don't like what's happened with medicine. And that a lot of providers don't want to be data entry clerks for a big cash register. So I think there's a little bit of danger with the technology, and we see what it's doing to young people's brains. More suicide, more depression, more substance abuse, more lack of self-image, and eyeballs changing, brains changing, ability to concentrate changing, that I think it's a real double-edged sword we have to be super, super careful of. And whereas I love the promise, there's also a problem with prioritization. So you can develop a technology that looks at lung nodules. We're seeing a lot of them with global warming and pollution. How about, and there's still communities where there's lots of smokers, how about if we pull back and fix the system so people don't develop the nodules in the first place? So priority and the danger of the use.
I think those are very fair points. And I think what's important here is as we create these AI solutions, these algorithms, is we have to be very transparent in terms of not only how they're created, the type of data that's utilized, but also the intent of these algorithms. Yeah, like how should you use this AI solution? And then secondly, the education portion. So really, not, instead of saying, hey, AI came up with this answer and it's this black box, actually remove that black box and kind of say, why did the AI make this clinical determination? Help me understand, educate the end user as to why the AI made the clinical conclusion that it did. These are important aspects to help not just with adoption, but also address some of the concerns that we've experienced with past technologies.
Yeah, I agree. I think, interpretability would be one very important aspect that we need to also focus on at the same time when we design this seemingly excellent performing models. We need to be able to understand them and explain their results. So that's that's the only way to make it really trustworthy. But still, like I said, because I am from the computer science area, because I have been witnessed the success of ChatGPT, and actually there are recently a even better performing model from a new startup company. So I've been able to see this success that I was not able to imagine at all a few years ago when I was still a PhD student. So I'm still very optimistic, and I hope that in the right way, with the right people, we can also bring the GPT moment to medicine as well. That's really my hope. Yeah,
and I think that there is this big movement of democratizing AI or explainable AI, right? And I think all of these efforts have to go hand in hand. And I think we've seen this with previous technology that now is incorporated into our lives in such a way that we don't even think about that, right? So every time new technology comes in, right, there is this big, revolution, right? And this is, of course, historic. So I think with every technology that is brought online, all these concerns, right? And consequences, and maybe unintended consequences, and regulation, right? They all need to be addressed in tandem. So the benefits, right? But also the problems and the cons. So I think that that is definitely super important to always have in mind.
Thank you. So join me in thanking the panel.